reflect reality.
The images you are seeing on television, you are seeing over and over and over, and it's the same picture of some person walking out of some building with a vase. And you see it 20 times. And you think, my goodness, were there that many vases? Is it possible that there were that many vases in the whole country?
It's more, though, than just a debate about images and impressions. Under the Geneva Conventions, the U.S. has a duty to maintain public order and safety now that it's pushed the regime from power. But U.S. troops are in a bind, trying to find the middle ground between a power vacuum and an overbearing presence, between protecting themselves and protecting the people under their control.
I think with all these discussions going on other matters, it's important to keep in mind that there is one major battle that's left, and that's Tikrit. The coalition is already moving against whatever forces are there. The question of their resistance, of the Iraqi resistance in that city, is problematic. But let's look at the map 1 second, get a feeling for where this is and what some options may be for the coalition in these coming hours. If you recall, the coalition did have several options from the north, through Tikrit to Baghdad, from the 173rd's bases north of Harir. Those are now gone. The only option that's available for the coalition is to attack Tikrit from the south with the units that are there in Baghdad or that are reinforcing the elements in Baghdad, like the 4th coming up from Kuwait. But importantly, there are additional factors that are at play here. My discussions with the Pentagon have indicated that for weeks, the coalition has flooded their term, this area, with special ops personnel, not only to isolate this city, but to make sure that these last stands of whatever remnants are left of the Iraqi army are not a next to last stand, and they're standing instead someplace west of the city or outside of Iraq itself. So this whole area is being sealed off. This whole area now is being approached by the coalition from the south. I think the pace of this will be very rapid. The coalition has not substantially paused to this point, and the pace will be inexorable as we see the advance from Baghdad to the north.
Baghdad wallows in the wreckage of war. Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles blown up on the city streets, cars and trucks still waving the white flag lest they be mistaken for the enemy. And here, right in the middle of a residential neighborhood, a missile. We're told a SAM-2. Marines are here to make sure it's safely towed away. And the people complain loudly about the fallen regime placing such targets in their midst. They said they were afraid of U.S. bombs dropped in this neighborhood, perhaps aiming for the missile. This is a deep crater caused by a bomb, and around what seems to be the remnants of some kind of vehicle. But just 20 yards away, there are private homes. And the doctors here tell us that they've received many more civilian casualties during this war than they did during the first Gulf War of 1991.
This is a shells to the abdomen. We open the abdomen and have injury to the bowel.
At this, they have received 500 civilians, with everything from slight to critical injuries.
In the first war, we didn't see such a huge number. This is number one. And secondly, the type of injuries here is more serious, as I noticed, than before.
He simply can't get the staff to come to work.
But thanks God, we cope. Yeah, what to do?
That's because they brought their own guns to keep the bandits at bay. U.S. Marines have set up a position near another hospital. Children bring them flowers, and the Marines say they're trying to calm the fears of the past few chaotic days.
Let them know we're not here to harm them. We're here for peace now. That's our mission. It's to give them security.
Down by the main Marine base, a group of Iraqis decided to make that demand more clear, waving a banner calling for a new order and yelling for peace. In the end, though, calm prevailed, with both the Iraqis and the Marines deciding that discretion is the better part of valor. Christiana Manpour, CNN, Baghdad.
Over Iraq every day for more than 3 weeks. And now the coalition air forces are preparing the ground for what may be the final battle of the war. This is Tikrit, a town about 100 miles north of Baghdad. It is Saddam Hussein's birthplace, and it may be where he makes his last stand with his most loyal followers. The coalition has been keeping a close eye on Tikrit. Its aircraft have already destroyed a number of buildings used by Iraq's former leaders.
This photo is a facility near Tikrit used for assembly and coordination by regime leaders.
Now American land forces are closing in on the town.
Tikrit is one of the areas where we still have concern that there may be presence of regime forces or some capabilities that still exist, and we have been relentless in our effort focused against the Tikrit area.
Advance units of the 4th Infantry Division, newly arrived from the United States, are thought to be heading for Tikrit, together with elements of the US Marine Corps. They're expected to arrive in the town's vicinity in the next few days. The coalition hopes that any battle for Tikrit will bring to an end the war-fighting phase of this campaign. It will also be hoping that it might resolve the mystery of what has happened to Saddam Hussein and those closest to him. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at Coalition Military.
The location of some remains, some human remains in an empty lot in southern Baghdad. The soldiers then positively identifying those remains as the remains of a U.S. serviceman. In a very dignified ceremony on the scene, the soldiers prayed for that serviceman, then evacuated the remains from that area. Just an hour later, a very different kind of mission, acting on a tip from an informant. The soldiers raided a mosque, again in southern Baghdad. They'd been told that they would find some 30 Fedayeen, the so-called Fedayeen paramilitary fighters inside. Instead, they found some military garb, a first aid station, a weapon, and some documents, including, very interestingly, some Syrian passports. That wasn't all of it. They also hit a Ba'ath Party headquarters there, finding a Rolls-Royce and, believe it or not, a Huey helicopter camouflaged in the backyard. Then later in the day, they found 13 surface-to-air missiles. A series of disparate events. The common thread through all of it really is that the 101st Airborne has turned into a police unit, really policing the city of Baghdad. Ryan Chilcote, CNN with the 101st Airborne's 3rd Brigade in southern Baghdad.
It's unisex, one size fits all. A non-returnable garment worn by those dressed to kill. Suicide vests. 50 were found, stored at an elementary school.
Coat pump of suicide. You understand me? Of suicide. The volunteers use it.
They're detonators, simple, easy to use.
Every one of them, had laminated instructions and tagged on here. So, as long as the bomber could read, he'd go carry out his mission.
The Marine explosives experts don't want us to show their faces, but want us to know the sophistication of the Iraqi suicide squads, unknown in number or location.
This was a centralized place where they dropped all the stuff off, the bombers would pick it up, carry it off, and go carry out their mission. The first type, this pretty much had a 30-second delay. They flipped it on, they pulled us out, 30 seconds, it detonates.
Lieutenant Colonel Chris Conlon's Marines stand guard over these weapons while they await removal.
Destructive power, it would be kind of hard to estimate. It depends on where the guy is when it goes off, but certainly if he got into a crowded area, he could take out 10s, 20s, 30s of people.
Here they also found more than 200 other explosives of the more standard variety, the kind that go under cars, into briefcases, and are used for booby traps. More haunting, what's not here, these empty hangars suggesting the possibility that there are Iraqis wearing explosive vests waiting to detonate themselves. Jason Bellini, CNN, Baghdad, Iraq.
Organized military force that the Iraqi military has to offer is believed to be in and around the city of Tikrit, which is, of course, Saddam Hussein's hometown and the regional headquarters, at least, for the Ba'ath Party. U.S. forces from the air continue to pick apart the Adnan division and their armor around the city. It's not clear whether there's a good deal of chaos. There have been some reports from reporters in the area that there may be chaos descending on the city of Tikrit also as we speak. So it's not clear whether there will be a force-on-force conflict there, but it remains an area of concern, certainly. And Brigadier General Vince Brooks at the CENTCOM briefing in Doha addressed that today.
Tikrit is one of the areas where we still have concern that there may be presence of regime forces or some capabilities that still exist. And we have been relentless in our effort focused against the Tikrit area. This is not something new. This has been ongoing for some time throughout the campaign because we know that it is an area that has been important to the regime and that regime leaders are from in and around the Tikrit area.
And of course, as I just mentioned, air power does continue to pick away at the military forces arrayed around the city of Tikrit. It's once again not known whether they're in a position to put up a fight at this point. Air power certainly performed near miracles on the Republican Guard divisions around Baghdad, reducing them to forces that were not able to put up much of a fight. I suppose at this point, coalition military planners are hoping that the same result will be achieved at Tikrit. Meanwhile, certain airplanes, some of the B-2 stealth bombers and other bombers are headed back.
Call to show up for work. Ahmed Zaki Abdul Razak describes himself as the former director of public police, pledging now to work under U.S. Marine supervision.
There will be police patrols that will be designated to different neighborhoods of Baghdad, either tomorrow or the day after.
With Marines still primarily engaged in running down remnants of the former regime and wholesale looting still endemic in the capital, the deal to work with the former enemy is a necessity.
The same thing happened in 1945 in Berlin when the Nazis fell. I mean, you still had people who knew how to run things, who were forced to join the party for employment, but that had the sincere interest of the people at heart. So those are the people we're looking forward to working with.
In some neighborhoods, residents have set up their own checkpoints. And even if they don't agree with the Marines' assessment of good-hearted policemen, the desperation for security is such they'll accept their old force back. The old police weren't good, he says, but having them is better than this chaos.
A self-destruct button right here.
Worse, possibly, than the chaos, the discovery of a distribution outlet for suicide bombers. 50 ready-made vests packed with explosives, carefully wrapped like so much clean laundry. Several dozen empty hangars and no indication where those suicide vests might be. In their effort to end the chaos, Iraqi engineers inspecting one of the capital's primary power plants figure they can soon get Baghdad's lights back on. What they need, they say, a way to tell the employees to come back to work, a bus to get them there, and security to convince them it's safe. And for all, whether doctors, policemen or engineers, the hard personal dilemma many will face here in the coming days, whether they can work with the Americans and not consider themselves collaborators. Likely the policemen going back on the streets with Nick
military resistance. When last I checked, this force was moving on to Tikrit, and there was not any resistance.
What does that say to you? The Republican Guard, the Special Republican Guard, the Special Security Organizations, all of Saddam Hussein's military and police have crumbled?
One would like to think that, but I think we would be premature to say, well, gosh, it's all done, it's all finished.
Sources tell CNN that 7 U.S. troops have been released near the city of Samarra after Iraqi forces abandoned their posts. Bob Franken is embedded with the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit.
We have now confirmed the number is 7, and we also have new information, and as you can imagine, it's trickling out. We are now told that 2 of them suffered gunshot wounds. We do not know the extent of the wounds, anything more about it, but that 2 of them had been injured. And just to recap, according to the sources here, they were being held somewhere north of Samarra in Iraq when the officers in the unit that was holding them captive deserted. The junior members of that unit decided to help them become free, so they escorted them until they ran into a Marine unit, an light armored unit that was going up the road, and turned them over. Now they're heading here. They will be checked at the field hospital at this base, which, as I said, is about 65 miles south of Baghdad. Assuming they check out okay and can be transported, a plane will take them, in all probability, to Kuwait for further testing and debriefing.
Elsewhere in the capital, lines formed as residents waited for bread. Trading in the city has slowly begun to return to normal, although sporadic looting is still reported. Prices on some basic goods have risen dramatically from before the war, but are now reportedly dropping in some areas. There have been anti-American protests in the Iraqi capital and reports of explosions and gunfire. Let's get the latest now on the situation from Martin Savage, who is in Baghdad. Martin.
Hello, Relitza. Yes, there still is instability, some of it quite obvious here in Baghdad. Let me show you the bread lines that have opened up here. You mentioned the storefronts. That is one sign of life at least starting to return to normal. We've noticed that over the past couple of days. More and more stores starting to reopen, and this is the line of people waiting for bread. The people of Baghdad, and we're talking about millions of people, have been desperate for any sort of food, water, electricity, the basics, obviously, to survive. We've noted that while we've been here, especially when we were down on the street, you have people who come up to you and literally beg you for any kind of food, beg you for water, and also beg you for the use of a telephone to try to contact family members outside of Iraq. But at least the stores are beginning to open. Now it's the scarcity of money, and bartering and how to buy products is another tough issue for these people that have suffered a great deal in this city. You mentioned anti-American protests. There have been those. There was one that took place in front of the Palestinian hotel. Another one taking place at a mosque nearby in Baghdad, protesting against both the United States and also shouting anti-American slogans and anti-Israeli slogans. Not everyone clearly happy here to see the U.S. military presence, perhaps happy that Saddam Hussein and his regime are gone, but they are not keen about the fact that they see a large U.S. military force now in place and possibly in place here in Iraq for quite some time. That makes some people just uncomfortable. And then there is the cleanup that's underway. You mentioned the looting. Well, they are also starting to try to restore electricity. That's one of the primary needs right now. Getting the lights turned back on, that would go a long way, especially at night, to increasing the security. U.S. troops can only go so far. Police officers trying to come back to work. But turning the lights on would help make life a lot better. It's not a simple process like flipping a switch. It's actually very involved in a scientific process. And they're cleaning up, trying to clean up from the looting, trying to clean up from the fighting, trying to get Baghdad back to the city that it once was. Relitza?
Martin, what can you tell us about the measures taken to curb looting to provide security to Baghdad?
A number of things have been taken on several different levels. The U.S. military did beef up patrols. They've also put Marines on the street on foot patrols, trying to show to the populace that they are there. They constantly return to different streets, and they look for areas where there have been problems in the past and continue to go back. They also monitor from the air. There are small remote control surveillance aircraft that are constantly circling over Baghdad, keeping an eye out for any particular problems so that the Marines can respond quickly if they do find them. As I mentioned, the chief of police, or one of the senior police officers, came to the hotel here to meet with U.S. military officials to talk about getting his officers back to work and how they would interface with the U.S. military. That's the tricky part there. And then you have people themselves, store owners armed with AK-47s trying to protect their own property. In some neighborhoods, people have banded together in sort of neighborhood watches, trying to watch over their homes, setting up roadblocks using any sort of debris they can find, whether it be tree branches, burned out cars, or any sort of bricks or mortar they can throw on the road to try to keep the vehicles out, because the vehicles are part of what the looters use. So 3 levels, some of it pretty crude, some of it right up to the U.S. military. Relitza?
Martin Savage in Baghdad, thank you very much. Well, to the north of Baghdad, coalition troops have arrived in Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit, but it seems that they are not welcome there. Brent Sadler updates us now from Erbil in northern Iraq. Brent.
Thanks, Relitza. I can tell you we've just returned here to our base in Erbil after a very harrowing journey to Tikrit before the move by coalition forces. And I can give you an idea of what we saw there by video we took live at the time, exclusive pictures of the kind of area around Tikrit that coalition forces were moving into. Now, we saw huge areas, massive military complexes abandoned. Regular army as well as Republican army, tank units, regiments, and hundreds of either derelict, rundown, but many scores of active frontline for Iraqi, by Iraqi standards, frontline vehicles left abandoned in defensive positions in dugout locations just north of Tikrit. Now, Tikrit, we know, is a tribal heartland of support for Saddam Hussein. These are not the sort of people who are in Tikrit, who've been running Tikrit under Saddam Hussein's regime, who are going to welcome coalition forces by any means. These Iraqis have enjoyed the favor, the limelight, if you like, of Saddam Hussein's rule for the past 3 decades. Tikrit is his hometown. That's where his roots are, and this town is hostile, was hostile to coalition moves towards it. Now, it was expected that the firepower that Saddam Hussein might have amassed around Tikrit might have caused the coalition problems. Several hours ago, when I was in there on the outskirts to begin with, there was no sign of any conventionally organized army still in positions, still ready to defend Tikrit. The coalition aircraft have been striking a main road north and south to Tikrit during the hours of darkness and in the early hours of this morning, and certainly we saw many soldiers drifting away, mostly in civilian clothing, heading south towards Baghdad. So on the one hand, we saw this massive abandonment of military equipment around Tikrit, the main fortifications, if you like, to prevent an invasion, a mini-invasion of Tikrit, an incursion. Now, what we did then, again before the presence of coalition forces, was to go into Tikrit. We checked with people. They told us that Saddam Hussein's rule had finished in the city itself, so we went in with an escort to begin with of a local Tikriti, a man who was a school teacher. He said we should follow him. People would talk to us in there. We went in there. It started off reasonably well, talking to people, but then people came along to complain about bombing, clearly hostile, and what you're about to see now is a firefight of locals, a checkpoint, and a real gauntlet of fire we had to run to get out of Tikrit. Here it goes. Following fires here out of Tikrit. So let's just recap as we go through here that Tikrit, no coalition forces. Tikrit, no fighting. Checkpoint. Okay, that's gunfire. Okay, we've just come under attack. Under attack. We're okay, we're okay. Under fire. That confirms our worst fears. If you're with us. Are you with us, Anderson? Okay, we've just run a checkpoint. We have come under automatic machine gun fire. We blew through the checkpoint. They tried to stop us. And our armed guard pulled his machine gun, his automatic machine gun, and opened fire to get us through there. I think that's as far as we're going to push it today. Well, after the aftermath of that, obviously very dramatic moments there for all of us, all of the CNN crew, Christian Stribe on camera, and myself, Maria Fleet, also on camera as part of that convoy, and William Scully also with us. Now, what I can tell you is the estimation, maybe 100 rounds were fired at us. This is the vehicle that took most of the fire. Both vehicles were hit. This one took AK-47 rounds.
Release, as you just heard, may not be welcome, but they're definitely there. That, according to General Tommy Franks, the commander of the coalition forces in Iraq, he says, I wouldn't say it's over, but I will say we have American forces in Tikrit right now. When I last checked, this force was moving on the city, and there was not any resistance. So just how much resistance they did face going in is not clear. We do have some pictures from Tikrit. We're getting some pictures of that, and we can tell you that there is some damage in these pictures. No idea the size of the force. We did know 24 hours ago that the U.S. Marines were moving forward out of Baghdad towards Tikrit, and also the 4th Infantry Division coming out of Kuwait, making their way, the lead elements crossing 24 hours ago. But it appears that the Marines are the first lead advance elements on Tikrit.